Prince Harry has just given us one of the clearest examples yet of the problem at the centre of his public life. He stood on a stage connected to Invictus, spoke about service, resilience, community, and bringing people together, and somehow managed to avoid the one subject everyone knew was hanging over him: the devastating court defeat that has changed the entire conversation around his war with the press. That silence was not accidental, it was strategic. Harry knew exactly what had happened that week. He knew the headlines, he knew the judgment, he knew the criticism. He knew that commentators were asking whether his credibility had been damaged. He knew that his long campaign against parts of the British press had just suffered a major blow. But in front of the Invictus audience, he chose to act as though none of it existed. Instead, he reached for the familiar language: service, resilience, national strength, standing together, the power of sport, the Invictus community, and the journey that began in London in 2014. On paper, that is exactly what Harry should be talking about at an Invictus event. Invictus is one of the most important things he has ever been associated with. It is serious, meaningful, and genuinely valuable to wounded service personnel and veterans. It deserves respect. But the difficulty for Harry is that he no longer appears in a vacuum.
Understood the importance of service, resilience, and standing together when it matters most. Today we've had a glimpse of what's waiting for us next summer. We've seen determination, we've seen laughter, some sweat, and we've seen people trying something new, cheering each other on, and proving once again that sport has an incredible way of bringing people together.
Every speech he gives now carries the weight of everything else: Spare, Oprah, Netflix, the lawsuits, the security battle, the palace briefings, the family tension, the claims about the press, the public attacks on Queen Camilla, the distance from Prince William, and the unresolved question of whether he and Meghan actually want privacy or simply control. So when Harry appeared at this Invictus event and gave a speech that ignored the court defeat, the silence became louder than the words. He spoke about bringing the Games back to the United Kingdom 13 years after London 2014, and described it as special because Britain understands service and resilience. He talked about seeing familiar faces from the original Invictus journey. He tried to make a joke about some people having lost more hair, a moment that might once have worked easily for him. The younger Harry, the looser Harry, the prince who could laugh at himself and bring a room with him, might have turned that line into warmth. But according to the reaction described in the source material, the room did not really respond. The atmosphere felt muted. And that matters because it suggests something deeper than a joke falling flat. It suggests that Harry's public connection with British audiences has changed. This is one of the most painful parts of the story. Harry used to have an easy rapport with the public. He was often seen as the relaxed, cheeky, human face of the monarchy.
What has struck me walking around the arena today is just how many faces I recognise from those different groups that were part of the original journey back in 2014. Some of us have lost more of our hair.
Oh my God.
Some of us look younger than we did before. Some of us look older.
That is astonishing, isn't it? Because that's the moment where it's like...
He had military credibility, a natural ability to speak to veterans, and a kind of informal charm that made him accessible in a way many royals are not. Invictus grew out of that image. It was personal, but not self-indulgent. It was royal service with a human edge. Now, even Invictus risks being overshadowed by the Sussex drama, and that is not the fault of the athletes, it is not the fault of the veterans, it is not the fault of the organisers or the volunteers. It is the result of Harry repeatedly allowing his personal battles to surround the project. Every time Invictus should be the story, the conversation turns to Meghan, the children, security, the king, the court case, Buckingham Palace accommodation, or whether Harry is trying to repair his royal image. That is deeply unfair to Invictus. It is also deeply damaging to Harry, because Invictus is one of the few public spaces where he still has genuine moral authority. If he loses that, he loses more than a charity association. He loses the strongest argument that his public life still has a purpose beyond grievance. This is why his lack of contrition matters. After such a major courtroom defeat, many people expected some sign of humility, not necessarily a full apology, not a dramatic confession, but at least some indication that Harry understood the seriousness of what had happened.
I have never seen much contrition from the Sussexes. I don't think they fully understand or appreciate what the word means. Look at Meghan, for example. I mean, she's the most trolled person in the world, we hear, and of course, the lies they spread about the royal family, for example, and famously on Oprah, then of course in the Netflix series, and of course Harry's memoir Spare was a bizarre feat, but they're not into contrition. What they tend to believe, we've just heard it, I mean, obviously we know Invictus.
He had helped bring grave allegations into court. Journalists were accused of wrongdoing. A major newspaper group was accused of unlawful behavior. Reputations were placed under a cloud. The case dragged on for years, and then the claims failed. In that situation, a more self-aware public figure might have paused. He might have said that he respects the court, even while disagreeing with aspects of the outcome. He might have acknowledged that the legal process is difficult for everyone involved. He might have signaled that he had heard the judgment and would reflect on it. Harry did none of that in the Invictus appearance described in the transcript. He moved on, as though the public could be moved on with him. But the public is not so easily redirected anymore. That brings us to the children. One of the most striking parts of the discussion around this appearance was the suggestion that Harry and Meghan may be using speculation about Archie and Lilibet to shift attention away from the court defeat. That is a harsh accusation, and because the children are private minors, it has to be handled carefully. The children have done nothing wrong. They did not choose royal status, family conflict, legal drama, or public scrutiny. They deserve protection. But the adults around them have repeatedly allowed their existence to become part of the narrative. The question now being asked is simple. Why is the possibility of Meghan and the children coming to Britain being floated at this exact moment?
This is a remarkable organisation. We know it does a great deal for wounded veterans, and there's little doubt about that. I mean, 10 years was celebrated in the service at St. Paul's, but the problem is the foundations, as I see it, the foundations on which they built their brand are crumbling away.
Why now, immediately after a legal humiliation? Why now, when Harry's credibility is under pressure? Why now, when the public conversation was focused on his defeat in court? Critics argue that the answer is obvious. If you want people to stop talking about a courtroom disaster, give them a different story. Create uncertainty. Will Meghan come? Will Archie and Lilibet come? Will they meet King Charles? Will the king see his grandchildren? Will there be a family reunion? Will there be photographs? Will they visit Princess Diana's grave? Will Camilla be there? Will William stay away? Suddenly, the legal defeat is no longer the only story. That is why the timing looks so convenient. It does not mean Harry has no genuine desire for his children to know his family. Of course he may want that. It would be natural for him to want Archie and Lilibet to understand where he came from, to know their grandfather, and to have some relationship with the country that shaped his life. King Charles II may genuinely want to see his grandchildren. According to the reporting discussed in the source, the last time Charles saw his California-based grandchildren was in the summer of 2022, before he became king. That is a long time, especially for young children. So there may be real emotion here, but real emotion and public strategy can exist at the same time. That is what makes the Sussex story so complicated. Harry's pain can be real.
they should be, but I think this has been coming for some time, and I see the Sussex's plan in three parts. I mean, firstly, as you know, I mean, we don't see the faces of the children often. They're, as it were, somewhat hidden, which is in itself rather odd, but of course that's up to them. But the first part in this was, I thought, an impertinence. For example, to go to Australia on this faux royal tour, which Meghan, of course, was using for commercial.
And his media tactics can still be cynical. Meghan's desire to protect the children can be real, and the timing of the briefing can still be useful. Charles can want to see his grandchildren, and the palace can still fear that any meeting might be leaked, framed, or used later. The contradiction becomes even sharper because of Harry's security argument. For years, Harry has insisted that the United Kingdom is not safe enough for his family without the level of protection he believes they need. He has challenged security arrangements. He has argued that Meghan and the children cannot easily come to Britain. He has made safety one of the central pillars of his post-royal grievance. But if Meghan, Archie and Lilibet do come to Britain now, and if they move around without the enhanced security Harry has demanded, then critics will ask, what changed? Was the country unsafe before but safe now? Was the threat overstated? Is the security issue being used only when convenient? If the visit goes smoothly, it weakens the idea that the current system makes family life in Britain impossible. If the visit does not happen, Harry can continue to suggest that his family has been kept away from the king. Either way, he has created a public trap for himself. This is what happens when a person makes absolute claims. Once Harry says the situation is unsafe, any ordinary visit becomes politically and emotionally loaded. A simple family meeting becomes evidence in a wider argument.
This without the publicity that they got. Harry knew perfectly well he wouldn't get security, but nonetheless they used it as a form of emotional blackmail, as I see it, because first we had this unbelievably humorous saga about whether or not he was to stay in a royal accommodation. That turned out to be Buckingham Palace, and it turned out also the palace didn't want, given that the court case would probably, and Harry expected a victory possibly, I'm sure he did, and so he could have given a speech from the steps of the court, or if he'd wished, and then of course the optics of him going back to Buckingham Palace with the king being head of the judiciary would not have been good. But also
a child seeing a grandfather becomes part of a debate about police protection. A trip to Britain becomes a test case for Harry's entire narrative. That is not healthy for anyone involved. Then there is the question of King Charles. According to the reporting discussed in the transcript, last-minute talks were taking place about a possible meeting between Harry and his father. One version suggested Harry could travel from Birmingham to meet Charles at Highgrove in Gloucestershire. Staff on both sides were said to be suspicious of each other's motives. Harry was reportedly trying to work out a way for his family to travel as well, because he wanted Archie and Lilibet to see their grandfather. That detail alone tells us how delicate the situation is. This is not simply a father and son choosing a time for tea. This is a negotiation between camps. The king's staff, Harry's people, public optics, security, travel logistics, press management, and family history are all tangled together. Even the location matters. Highgrove is not Buckingham Palace. It is more personal, more private, and perhaps less constitutionally awkward than a high-profile royal residence in London. But even a private location does not remove the risk. The palace has reason to be cautious, because past meetings with Harry have not always stayed quiet.
And not only security and not only accommodation, but also Meghan. I mean, they released, Harry and Meghan actually had their team release the schedule. The schedule's been torn up, but you're right about what happens next, because we're not about to see Meghan and the children. But what is probable, I suspect, since the king, as you say, wants to see his grandchildren, that there will be a meeting of some sort. But that, we must qualify that. It's absolutely essential, and I think that the royal family absorbed this. William wouldn't have anything to do with it, I'm certain. But I think it's absolute.
After Harry saw King Charles following the king's cancer diagnosis, he soon gave a television interview in America. After another brief meeting connected to his UK visit, he gave an interview elsewhere. Every time the palace allows access, there is concern that the details, the emotional tone, or the symbolic meaning will become part of another public narrative. That is why any meeting would need strict boundaries. No photographs, no recordings, no briefing afterward, no carefully worded leak about the king's mood, no suggestion that the palace has opened the door to a broader Sussex return. No use of the children as emotional leverage, no public pressure on William, no implied endorsement from the monarchy. If Charles wants to see his son and grandchildren, he should be able to do that as a father and grandfather. But the institution cannot allow a private meeting to become another Sussex production. This is where Queen Camilla and Prince William come in. The reporting and commentary suggested that Camilla would likely not be involved and might be elsewhere, perhaps at her own home in Wiltshire. That is hardly surprising. Harry's comments about Camilla in Spare and in interviews were deeply damaging. He painted her as dangerous, ambitious, and willing to play a media game to rehabilitate her image. Whether Harry believes that or not, those words cannot simply disappear. Camilla has no reason to sit inside another Sussex drama.
Essential. Firstly, no photographs, no recording, anything that, when he saw King Charles after he had heard he had cancer, he was on Good Morning America the next time. Literally a short while afterwards, when he recently, last September, saw King Charles for 50 minutes, I think it was, and he was in Ukraine, fair enough, linked to Invictus. What does he do? He gives an interview to The Guardian. So anything about linked to the media must clearly not happen. I do think the king wants to see his grandchildren. I think he probably will.
For William, the position is even clearer. He has shown no appetite for a reunion under public pressure. He has his own family, his own role, and his own memories of what Harry has said and done. A meeting between Harry and Charles is already delicate. A meeting involving William would be explosive. If William stays away, it signals that the door to father-son contact is not the same as the door to full family reconciliation. That distinction matters. King Charles may be softer because he is a father. William may be firmer because he is a brother who feels betrayed and a future king protecting the institution he will inherit. Camilla may simply want no part of it. All three positions can make sense at the same time. The Althorp element adds another emotional layer. The source material discussed reports that Harry may stay with his uncle, Lord Spencer, at Althorp, the Spencer family estate near Northampton, where Princess Diana is buried on an island in the middle of a lake. It was also reported that Harry and Meghan plan to take Archie and Lilibet to see their paternal grandmother's grave, with Diana's siblings, Charles Spencer, Lady Jane Fellows, and Lady Sarah McCorquodale, possibly involved in a family gathering. On a human level, that is understandable. Harry may want his children to feel connected to Diana's memory. He may want them to know that side of their family. He may want them to stand in a place that means
Manchester Sussex will not be attending any public-facing engagements. Kate Mancy, the assistant editor of The Times, added, "Let's see," with the suggestion, of course, that there is going to be some type of public-facing encounter, potentially with the king, although they all say, actually, all of that will remain behind closed doors. But this is the reporting on the Woke ITV website that I want to get into with you, because it's quite interesting stuff, Richard, and it is new developments. So Ship reports that ITV News understands last-minute discussions have been taking place in the last few days.
Something profound to him. But once again, the question becomes, is this private or is it part of a larger story? Critics are already speculating that any visit to Diana's grave could be connected to future media material around the 30th anniversary of Diana's death in 2027. That is speculation, not confirmed fact. But the fact that people immediately think in those terms shows how damaged the trust has become. In another family, a father taking his children to their grandmother's resting place would be seen as private and touching. With Harry and Meghan, many people immediately ask whether there will be footage, photographs, documentary value, or future commercial use. That is the price of years spent turning private pain into public content. Once a memoir has revealed intimate family details, once a documentary has used private moments as narrative material, once interviews have aired deeply personal accusations, the public begins to assume that anything emotional might eventually become content. That may be unfair in some individual cases, but it is not irrational. It is based on pattern, and pattern is everything now. The pattern critics see is that Harry and Meghan seek privacy for the children, but allow the idea of the children to become strategically useful. They keep Archie and Lilibet's faces largely hidden, which is their right as parents, but their titles, names, absence, possible travel,
over a meeting between Prince Harry and his father, King Charles. They're trying to find a mutually convenient time and location for the father and son to see each other, but staff in both camps are suspicious of the other's motives. The latest arrangements centre on Harry travelling 90 minutes from Birmingham to meet the King at his Highgrove estate in Gloucestershire. Harry is trying to work out a way for his family to travel there too, as he is keen for his two children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, to see their grandfather. The last time King Charles saw his two California-based grandchildren was in the summer of 2022, meaning they have never met him as king. However, there is some briefing,
and possible meetings with the King become regular points of public discussion. The children are protected visually, but not fully protected narratively. That is the uncomfortable distinction. To be clear, no one should be demanding access to the children. They are minors and should be left alone. But Harry and Meghan also cannot use the children's possible presence as a public relations tool and then act shocked when people discuss the implications. If the children are part of a briefing about Highgrove, Althorpe, Diana, the King, and security, then the adults have made them part of the story. That is the concern. The broader issue is that the Sussexes often appear to want contradictory things. They want royal connection, but not royal discipline. They want privacy, but not silence. They want media attention when the story helps them, but object when the story hurts them. They want the emotional power of the children meeting the King, but they do not want the scrutiny that follows. They want to claim danger, but also suggest visits. They want to stand beside Invictus, but cannot stop personal drama from overshadowing it. This is why so many commentators now say the foundations of the Sussex brand are crumbling. The brand was built on several ideas: that Harry and Meghan were victims of a cruel institution, that the press was the great enemy.
Lake, Harry and Meghan plan to take Archie and Lilibet to see their paternal grandmother's grave. The Spencer family reunion on Friday and Saturday will include all of Diana's siblings, Charles Spencer, Lady Jane Fellows, and Lady Sarah McCorkindale. If King Charles is at his Highgrove estate this weekend, it is unlikely Queen Camilla will also be there. Surprise, surprise! After the negative comments Harry made about her in his book Spare, the Queen does have a family home in Wiltshire where she does often stay at the weekend. So what is quite clear, Richard, is that, she's going to pop off, isn't she, to Wiltshire and say, I'm having nothing to do with this. But very interesting, because what Chris Ship doesn't mention,
that they had escaped to build a freer and more authentic life, that they wanted privacy, that their story was a modern royal morality tale. For a while, that worked. It generated sympathy, attention, contracts, interviews, and global fascination. But over time, the contradictions became harder to ignore. If they wanted privacy, why so many interviews? If they wanted freedom from the monarchy, why keep using the titles? If they wanted to move forward, why keep returning to the same grievances? If Harry wanted to protect Invictus, why allow every event to become wrapped in Sussex family drama? If the UK was too dangerous, why brief possible family visits? If the palace was so untrustworthy, why keep demanding access to it? These are not small contradictions. They are the story now, and Harry's court defeat intensified all of them. The legal loss did more than embarrass him. It punctured the image of Harry as a righteous warrior against the press. It reminded people that allegations require evidence. It gave journalists and critics a reason to speak more boldly. It made the public ask whether Harry's perception of events is always reliable, and it made his refusal to show contrition look even worse. That is why the Invictus speech landed so awkwardly. On its own, the speech was standard. It praised service, community, resilience, and the power of sport.
So, I mean, were like years apart, and there can't be any love lost either. And in Spare, of course, Harry said, well, it was a sort of hate fest against several courtiers who, of course, wouldn't appreciate it. The one exception is interesting, potentially Jamie Lowther Pinkerton, who was the private secretary who was very close to both princes, but years ago, for 8 years, and he's always been there's always been the possibility that he might perhaps play a mediator between Harry and William.
But in context, it looked like Harry trying to step around a crater in the road. Everyone could see it, everyone knew it was there, he simply refused to look down. That is not leadership. Leadership would have meant acknowledging the difficult week without turning Invictus into a legal statement. A single sentence could have been enough. Something measured, something respectful, something that showed he understood the seriousness of the moment. Instead, he offered the same polished language and expected the audience to follow along. But audiences are tired of being managed. They can feel when a subject is being avoided. They can feel when children are suddenly introduced into the narrative. They can feel when royal access is being used to change the subject. They can feel when a private family meeting is being briefed before it has even happened. They can feel when Invictus is being pulled into a public relations storm. That fatigue is dangerous for Harry and Meghan. Public curiosity remains. People still watch, they still click, they still argue. But curiosity is not the same as sympathy. In fact, the Sussexes may now be in the worst possible position for public figures. People are still interested, but many no longer believe them. That is a hard place to escape. When belief is lost,
court case, and you know, of course, Charlotte Griffith's articles and revealing the fact that Harry told absolute
lies.
Yes,
she was here earlier this week, and I do encourage everyone to go and watch that full interview, because obviously she does explain, and Richard, I believe, and I know she took a lot of flack and I questioned her, but I do believe that what she said in court was completely legitimate, and I mean, the judge agrees.
The judge did agree. In fact, the complainants got absolutely nowhere. But I think with reference to this meeting, the Sussexes have a vested interest.
Every future move is interpreted through suspicion. If Meghan stays away from public events, critics say she is avoiding damage. If she appears, critics say she is chasing cameras. If Harry brings the children, critics say he is using them. If he does not, critics say he is punishing the king. If he meets Charles, critics say he is seeking royal legitimacy. If he does not, critics say he is prolonging the feud. If he speaks, critics say he is exploiting the family. If he stays silent, critics say he is plotting the next leak. That is the box they have built around themselves. The way out would be simple in theory and difficult in practice: stop performing the conflict. That means no more strategic briefings about possible meetings, no more public pressure on the king, no more security arguments played out through the media, no more using the children's possible travel as a headline, no more turning Diana's memory into a recurring frame for present-day disputes, no more Invictus appearances overshadowed by Sussex drama, no more pretending that every criticism is persecution. It would mean doing the opposite of what has made them famous in the post-royal era. It would mean quiet, and quiet may be the one thing Harry and Meghan's current brand cannot survive. This is the deepest irony. They say they wanted privacy, but their relevance now depends on continued public attention.
As well, you know, certainly commercially, they're not. He's not very bright. She's not very talented. So what have they got? They got the royal links. Now this is the ultimate meeting with the king, and also introducing the king, of course, to a future generation. You can understand that. I mean, it's. Archie and Lily, it's not their fault. Whether when William ascends the throne, their titles will remain is quite another matter, but then that's for the future. On this occasion, the courtiers, I mean, absolutely clear that
They say they wanted freedom from royal constraints, but their value still comes from royal proximity. They say they wanted to protect their children, but the children remain central to the emotional pressure surrounding Charles. They say they want reconciliation, but the route to reconciliation keeps running through the press. The palace seems to understand this better than it once did. The royal family has learned that responding too much only feeds the cycle. A denial becomes another story. A meeting becomes another leak. A gesture becomes another demand. A family moment becomes another chapter. So the palace stays cautious, formal, and quiet. It may allow Charles a private moment as a father, but it will not easily allow the Sussexes to turn that moment into a public victory. That is the line the palace has to hold, not because the king should be cruel to his son, not because the grandchildren should be punished, not because reconciliation is impossible, but because the monarchy cannot function if private feeling is constantly converted into public leverage. The same applies to the royal accommodation issue. According to the previous discussion, there had been confusion or disagreement around whether Harry could stay in Buckingham Palace or other royal accommodation. The optics were already difficult. If Harry had won his court case and then returned to Buckingham Palace with the king as head of state and connected symbolically to the judiciary, it could have looked deeply awkward.
Don't trust the motivations of the Sussexes. But once having leaked the fact, and it's bound to leak, as you know, I mean, from US Weekly to a whole variety of sources, the Sussexes ensure various thoughts get out. The one that deeply touched me, and I'm sure that deeply touched you, was the idea that after they'd met the king, they'd have, for example, a half-in, half-out situation outside Britain. How about that for
Richard Fitzwilliams?
If he lost as he did, the palace still risked being pulled into the story of his defeat. In either case, the institution had reason to keep its distance. Harry may see that as rejection, but from the palace perspective, it is risk management. And after years of Sussex drama, risk management is not paranoia, it is common sense. There is also the commercial dimension. Richard Fitzwilliams, in the Source conversation, argued that the Sussexes still rely heavily on their royal links. That is hard to dispute. Their global fame is inseparable from monarchy. Without the royal connection, the market value changes. The titles, the family access, the possibility of a meeting with the king, the children as grandchildren of the monarch, the Diana connection, the palace tension, all of it keeps the Sussex story commercially alive. That does not mean every move is purely commercial, but it does mean every move has commercial consequences. A meeting with King Charles is not just a family moment, it becomes proof of relevance. A trip to Althorpe is not just a private pilgrimage, it becomes emotionally powerful imagery. Meghan not attending public engagements is not just a personal choice, it becomes speculation about strategy. The children not being photographed is not just privacy, it becomes part of the mystique. This is the strange world Harry and Meghan now inhabit. Even their attempts at privacy become public currency. The question is whether they understand how exhausted people are by it. There was a time when Harry could stand in a room, make a self-deprecating joke, and feel the room come with him. There was a time when an Invictus appearance would have been covered almost entirely as a story about veterans and resilience. There was a time when the prospect of King Charles seeing his grandchildren would have generated sympathy without immediate suspicion. There was a time when a visit to Diana's grave would have been treated as sacred and private. That time has passed. Not because the public became cruel overnight, but because the Sussexes trained the public to look for the angle. When private life is repeatedly monetized, people look for the product. When family pain is repeatedly narrated, people look for the next installment. When reconciliation is repeatedly briefed, people look for the motive. When security fears are repeatedly emphasized, people look for consistency. When the press is condemned and then used, people look for hypocrisy. That is where Harry is now. He can still change direction, but it would require a level of discipline he has not yet shown. He would need to let Invictus stand on its own. He would need to keep his children out of strategic briefings. He would need to meet his father privately or not at all. He would need to stop demanding that the public accept every claim without question. He would need to accept that the court defeat was a serious moment, not a minor inconvenience to be managed. Most of all, he would need to stop acting as though every setback can be solved by changing the subject. The court defeat happened, the security contradiction exists, the palace distrust is real, Camilla's absence is understandable, William's distance is unsurprising, public skepticism is growing, and Invictus deserves better than being used as a stage on which all of this plays out. There is also a deeper personal tragedy in how far Harry has moved from the role that once suited him best. He did not need to be the constitutional thinker of the family. He did not need to be the future king. He did not need to carry the formal weight that William carries. Harry's strength was always supposed to be different. He could be the royal who connected emotionally, who brought attention to veterans, who spoke in a more informal language, and who used his unusual life experience to support people dealing with injury, trauma, and reinvention. That role still exists somewhere beneath all the noise. But it cannot survive if every appearance becomes another referendum on Meghan, security, the press, or the palace. A veteran attending an Invictus event should not become a supporting character in the Sussex media cycle. A speech about resilience should not be judged mainly by what Harry refused to say about his court defeat. A charity project should not have to carry the burden of a prince's unresolved family conflict. That is why Harry's advisors, if they are serious, should be telling him to separate the work from the warfare. Invictus should have its own clean public space, no leaks about royal meetings around it. No speculation about whether Meghan will appear, no children briefed into the story, no security drama in the background, no comparison between Harry's wife and his mother hovering over the coverage. Just the athletes, the families, the service community, and the cause. The fact that this sounds almost impossible shows how badly the brand has been tangled. For Meghan, the lesson should be similar. If she truly wants a separate identity, then she needs distance from the perpetual royal feud. A lifestyle brand, a family image, a cooking show, or a soft-focus California reinvention cannot sit comfortably beside constant battles over titles, security, palace access, and press revenge. The audience can feel the contradiction. One day the message is peace, warmth, and domestic ease. The next day it is suspicion, grievance, and another royal briefing. Those two stories cancel each other out. And for Charles, the lesson may be the hardest of all. He may never get the simple family reunion he wants. Any meeting now comes with conditions, risks, and competing interpretations. If he meets Harry, he may be accused of weakness. If he refuses, he may be accused of coldness. If he sees the grandchildren, the moment may be used to suggest the Sussexes still have special royal access. If he does not, he may be accused of denying children a relationship with their grandfather. That is a brutal emotional bind. But monarchy often requires choosing the least damaging option rather than the most emotionally satisfying one. Charles can be loving without being naive. He can leave the door open without letting the institution be used. He can see his son, if he chooses, while making clear that private family contact does not mean public rehabilitation. The same boundary applies to the children. Archie and Lilibet should not have to carry the symbolism of two adults' public strategy. They should be allowed to know their family without being turned into proof of a security argument, proof of reconciliation, proof of royal relevance, or proof of Diana's legacy. If Harry and Meghan truly want to protect them, the most protective thing would be to stop making their possible movements part of the public drama. That would be a real act of privacy. The coming days may produce a meeting with King Charles. They may produce a private family visit. They may produce a trip to Althorpe. They may produce more briefings, more denials, more speculation, and more arguments about whether Meghan and the children are coming or not. But whatever happens, the larger truth remains. Harry and Meghan cannot keep presenting themselves as private people while feeding a public drama. They cannot keep invoking family while placing family moments inside a media strategy. They cannot keep asking for sympathy while refusing responsibility. They cannot keep leaning on royal identity while attacking the institution that gives that identity its power. At some point, the story has to change. Either they become truly private citizens and live the quiet life they once claimed to want, or they accept that if they continue playing in the public arena, the public is allowed to judge what it sees. Right now, what many people see is not resilience. They see avoidance. They see a prince trying to talk about service while stepping around a courtroom defeat. They see speculation about children arriving at the exact moment the headlines need changing. They see a possible meeting with the king being briefed before it happens. They see Diana's memory once again being pulled into the present. They see Meghan hovering over the story, whether present or absent. And they see a royal family trying quietly but firmly to avoid being dragged back into the Sussex machine. That is why this moment feels so revealing. It is not simply about one speech, one meeting, one report, or one visit. It is about the credibility of the entire Sussex project. And after this week, that credibility looks more fragile than ever.